Last year, Ontario food banks saw a 12% jump in visits over the previous year, that according to Feed Ontario's 2021 report. They were young people, seniors, people with jobs. In rural Ontario, such supports can be even harder to find. That definitely doesn't mean the needs aren't there. With us to better understand poverty in smaller communities in Ontario, we're joined from Mount Pearl, Newfoundland, by former Brockville City Councillor Leigh Bursey, who's an anti-poverty activist and co-founder of Brockville Street Friends. In Dryden, in northwestern Ontario, Henry Wall, Chief Administrative Officer of the Kenora District Services Board, and in Chatham, Ontario, Polly Smith, Director of Employment and Social Services for the Municipality of Chatham-Kent. And we're delighted to welcome all of you onto our program tonight to shine a light on something that definitely needs a lot more illumination. And just before we start our conversation, I'm going to ask our director, Sheldon Osmond, to bring up a graphic here, and we'll just go through some numbers so everybody's got the background on this. And I'll go into some detail here for those who are listening on podcast and can't see these numbers. This is the percentage of Canadians living below the official poverty line. That's an income of about $63,000, just under, for a family of four in 2019, or $18,000 as an individual. And Canada, in the year 2015, 14.5% were considered living below the poverty line. In 2019, that number dropped to 10.1%. That's a drop of more than 1.3 million people. Now, numbers specific to the province of Ontario. In 2015, 15.1% of Ontarians were living below the poverty line. If we fast forward 4 years to 2019, that number drops to 10.9%. That's a drop of almost 500,000 people. It is, of course, still worth noting that roughly 1 in 10 people, that's 3.7 million people, live in poverty, according to 2019 numbers. And of course, all these numbers predate the pandemic, so let's keep that in mind. Now, Polly, math is not exactly my strong suit, but it seems like those numbers are going in the right direction, and that feels like unambiguously good news. Is it?
Thanks, Steve. I think it was good news. And may have had a lot to do with the federal funding for children, the National Child Benefit, and those sorts of benefits that have made a big difference to families. But with the pandemic and the increased housing costs, particularly in rural Ontario, the changes of housing has increased exponentially, that I think those numbers are no longer true. And more people are facing poverty again, and some people are falling into deeper poverty now.
Henry, what's the story in your neck of the woods?
I'd say something very similar. Before the pandemic, and we have to remember too that we've always had a high rate of poverty. Before the pandemic, about 1 in 3 children or families were living in poverty in the district of Kenora. And that seems like hasn't changed much. In fact, that we are seeing actually an intensification. And we think it's because of the cost of housing and also very high population growth as well in some of our communities. And so when you combine those things, we're finding that more and more families are sharing a housing unit, and the cost of living is intensifying. And so all those things are actually, when we look at it from a health standpoint, but also from a food bank usage, we're seeing some concerning numbers.
And Leigh, from your perch in Eastern Ontario, did you see the numbers coming down before the pandemic hit, and has it changed since the pandemic hit?
I think it's important to keep in context. Of course, they're going to come down when you see a raising minimum wage, when you see universal child benefits, you see anti-poverty national strategies, as well as national housing strategies being enacted by proactive governments, and that includes provincial and federal partnerships. That said, I mean, no doubt about it, it may have only been a snapshot before, because of course the market will bear what the market will bear, and it becomes a scenario where the more people or the more equity people have to work with, of course, the higher the cost of living. And I know that a shortage of housing in my neck of the woods, or my previous neck of the woods, was something that was outlined as a key focus and priority area of concern. And no doubt at this time, we see skyrocketing housing costs across the board in Ontario, and I think that that's plunging more people into poverty or more people into precarious housing scenarios than probably any time I can remember.
Let me just see if that's the case in southwestern Ontario, because certainly in the big cities you hear about skyrocketing housing prices, and even in mid-sized cities. Polly, Is housing and the affordability of housing a huge issue in southwestern Ontario?
It is a huge issue. We've had a tremendous growth, which is, good news in so many regards. But at the same time, the cost of housing and of houses in our community has doubled in recent years. And we also have lower than average than the provincial average in wages. So the impact on families being able to get into the market is very much a challenge. But the other impact is, of course, on rentals. So a lot of, being in growth mode, a lot of things are selling at very high prices, and rent prices have increased exponentially as well, which has led to a whole host of issues with evictions and people that were in affordable housing that can't find affordable housing again once they're evicted, and evicted many, many times through no fault of their own. A move, a renovation happening, whatever.
Henry, you used an expression in your first answer that I just wanted to follow up on. You talked about an intensification of poverty. And I wonder if you could just explain to us what that looks like.
Yeah. So with the high cost of construction in the north, our smaller building, shorter building season, and what we've seen over the last 7-8 years is a significant increase in number of families and households that are with the District Services Board just on the wait list for affordable housing. When I started with the District Services Board back in 2014, we had just under 400 households on the wait list for housing. Fast forward now, just in the midst of the pandemic, we have over 1,800 families and households waiting for housing. And so we're seeing that the ability to afford and attain housing is becoming more and more difficult for families. The cost of construction is quite significant. And so that just amplifies. One, we have a high growth rate in terms of population. The stock isn't keeping up. And we also remember a vast district that had a significant housing crisis, in particular in our First Nation communities, that is putting a lot of pressure on urban centers where families are looking to move to be closer to services, access education and health. And then with the cost of construction, it really has created an environment where we're seeing housing prices rise significantly, especially for small rural communities, including rents. And that's displacing more and more families who were already at the margins.
That's a story you hear about all the time south of the French River, but we don't hear it so much north of the French River. And it's interesting that it is just as bad up where you are as down where we are. Now, Leigh, I'm going to set up this next question delicately, because I don't normally like to ask people overly personal questions, but you have been rather public about what's happened to you in the last year or so. Let's remind everybody, you were a city councillor in Brockville. There are not too many politicians or even former politicians who find themselves homeless. What happened to you?
Well, that wasn't recent. To be clear, growing up in my adolescence, I found myself in an unfortunate circumstance that was, probably, I guess, probably not as uncommon as a lot of people would anticipate. It was a domestic circumstance that saw my mother and I living in a tent. And I know that there are many people in my demographic and some former classmates and colleagues of mine who faced similar or sometimes even more challenging precarious housing situations. And there's a circumstance that's not based on societal ill. That's a circumstance that was not necessarily based on a substance use disorder or justice involvement. It could happen to anyone. And there are other people who I'm working with, who I'm close with, who I interact with, who are colleagues of mine and people who advocate in this issue, who, quite frankly, are coming at this from all different levels. And as someone who works in the front line currently in homeless shelters and street outreach and a variety of different areas where basically I support containment facilities for functional tragedy, you can imagine that the reasons why people end up on the streets, or the reason why people end up in dire straits of either chronic or episodic homelessness or housing precariousness or just cyclical poverty, can be vast. And not all are substance use disorders. Not all are justice involvement, whether that be direct or indirect. Sometimes it's as simple as people have a willingness to go out and find an affordable place to live, but there's a vast shortage of them. And anyone who has had justice involvement is facing a brand new significant barrier towards their own prosperity and success. And this, this tumbling weed keeps turning, and it blossoms into another significant factor, which is now what we're seeing, as was alluded to by other panelists here, is with the intensification piece, rent eviction is a legitimacy. And specifically during a pandemic, you can imagine that there's an added onus. You have a number of people now who may be succumbing to some of their personal shortcomings because of a lack of in-person supports or a lack of consistent supports. And on top of that, some are facing economic turmoil and poverty for reasons that, are sometimes difficult to mitigate when we're talking about a pandemic. And all of those reasons can, of course, blossom and balloon into this tree of woe for so many families and so many people across Ontario. And no doubt, when you have a rising house cost, you have a rising fuel cost, a rising consumer home ownership cost, right? A rising rental facility cost, a rising cost of living for goods and services and food. You can imagine that you put all of these issues together, all the way down to a rising cost of education, and you have realized that it's harder than ever for some people to be able to lift themselves out of poverty, and the bootstraps mentality that we've attached ourselves to is just no longer accurate.
Well, let's go to southwestern Ontario again. And Polly, we want to give our viewers a snapshot of what life in Chatham-Kent is like by the numbers. So again, Sheldon, if you would, let's bring this up. The median income, and again, these numbers go back a few years, in Chatham-Kent, a little over $50,000 a year. That is less than the provincial median, which is about $5,000 higher. That gets you an unemployment rate of 7.4%, generally speaking, 11% for youth unemployment rate. And let's just continue a few more here. More than 16% of young people in the Chatham-Kent area don't graduate from high school, and the median income for an individual without high school in Chatham-Kent is $10,000. And homelessness since 2018 has increased by 144%. Okay, you can tell some of the stories with numbers, but the numbers don't tell the whole story. Polly, what story is not being told in those numbers?
I think really the story it's that poverty and homelessness is not all about choices. It's a lot about luck, the times that you're living in, the market, where you are living. Certainly in our community, a lot of people have found, they have slipped into poverty, or people that weren't really living in poverty are now, even though they had low incomes, because their costs were low, are now experiencing poverty. But when I think about my parents, who both grew up in poverty, they were able to escape poverty because they were born in the late 30s. After the war, things started to look up and opportunities presented themselves. And so they lived a life and gave me a better life than they could ever have imagined, truthfully.
Where were they from originally?
My mother was originally from here. My father immigrated from Belgium.
Okay.
So after the war, right, and with everything that was happening, and they were able to really, that's where that whole bootstrap mentality, I think, comes from. But the opportunities were there. And then I look at my son, for example, who's in his 20s, and him and his girlfriend, they want to have a house, and but they're struggling to get the wages that they would need to get into the market and pay rent. And they're okay, and they're doing well. They're okay, but they're not going to move ahead of, my generation easily. And if you have other things go wrong, if you don't have those family supports, as was mentioned, things can go south really fast. And if the services and supports you need are not in the community, which often happens in rural Ontario, you're behind the eight ball, essentially.
Right. Henry, I know when I've asked this question to other people in bigger cities, they can find alternatives when housing disappears on them, right? They can couch surf, they go stay with friends, they can find other family members. If you live in a city of 2.5 million people, chances are you may know some other people. When you live in a city of a few thousand people and you become homeless all of a sudden, what do you do?
Exactly, and that's a big challenge where how do you connect to services and supports, especially if you're in a community that is hundreds of kilometers away from a larger urban centers where some of those supports might be. And so what we're actually seeing is we're seeing a significant number of our community members actually being displaced, who are falling into homelessness. And an example of what we're hearing is that, in terms of youth homelessness in Winnipeg, that it's estimated that a number of the youth that are homeless in Winnipeg are actually from northwestern Ontario. And so it's really, the lack of options, especially around housing, with respect to seniors who may not have options to either downsize or afford their current housing situation, that the option is to move rather than to be able to find alternatives in a community. And very similar to young families and young professionals starting out. I consider myself still a bit of an import to Northern Ontario, having moved up from Mexico to Southern Ontario, then up here. 15 years ago, affordable housing, we were talking low-income families, low-income households. But I think that conversation now has changed to nurses, police officers, teachers, who cannot afford to access housing or even have access to that housing.
One of the expressions we hear a lot is, and you hear this both about Northern Ontario and rural Ontario, is that some of its best exports are young people. I mean, you hear that about Northern Ontario quite a bit, Henry. Are you finding that to be the case?
It's. I think when you look at the issue, it's twofold. We are seeing a number of young people, especially who have attained an education, not returning to our communities, but also we're seeing a significant amount of young people that are not graduating. And I think that's in part where, for many reasons, many factors and challenges that our young people face, and even simply to attain a high school education, where many have to leave their community, their families, in order to relocate to another community, could be hundreds of kilometers away, to simply attain a high school education, which can be a really daunting journey. And so when we look at just the number of young people that we have in our communities and the ability to grow our own talent and so forth becomes a bit more challenging, especially when we're lacking basic infrastructure like reliable internet, being able to participate in the virtual world. And we saw that a huge challenge through this pandemic, where many of our young people weren't being able to be in class because they lacked access to reliable internet.
Paulie, how about in southwestern Ontario? Young people as exports?
I think for many years that was the case. I think the tide's turning on that now. There are opportunities in Chatham-Kent that people are gravitating to. Many did leave for post-secondary. Many are coming back to Chatham-Kent for job opportunities and housing. Housing is being built and is still lower cost than some of the biggest centers.
Well, that's good to hear. Okay. Leigh, I want to get you back in here on the issue of Brockville Street Friends. You set that up. You and others have set that up to deal with some of the issues we've been talking about tonight. What do you guys do?
Well, I have to first make a big shout out and a lot of love to Mark Dara, who was the co-founder with me, my best friend, and also someone who's incredibly outspoken and has embraced this issue. I had a personal attachment and affinity, and as a public figure, it was one of those cases where people would message me and be like, Leigh, you're involved in housing and homelessness advocacy. We've got a young man we've found sleeping under a canopy of some kind or under a tree in a parking lot. Would you be willing to assist? Where do I send them? How do I access a service? What do they need? How can I help? And what we've quickly found out was that people very much want to help but don't always know how. So it became a scenario of marching out into the woods and collecting whatever goods and services we could accumulate and making sure we had a list of contacts and a list of agencies where people could access a free meal or access some low cost.
And is it working, Leigh? Are you having an impact?
I think so. Now, I'm trying to duplicate that here. Mount Pearl, as an example, is very much a similar demographic, but we are also attached to an urban center in a way that Brockville isn't. But it became a scenario where what started out as something so small and a few friendship kits turned into this blossoming, a volunteer effort community-wide, and our house is looking like thrift stores.
That sounds really good to hear. Let me follow up with Henry on this aspect of it. Henry, I know it's the case in a big city, for example, that if you get into trouble, there's a kind of anonymity a lot of the time when you live in a big city. Because there's just so many people here, you can't know that many people. But in smaller towns, there is this expression that everybody knows everybody and everybody knows everybody's business.
So is it harder to be in trouble in a smaller place?
There's a lot of misunderstanding, and I think stereotypes that come with homelessness and experiencing homelessness. And what we've been seeing over the years in our communities is that people are really in a desperate need and desperate crisis before they feel comfortable or just before they reach out. And I think more so in smaller communities where, if you're struggling with mental health or an addiction, it's not easy to reach out for help because there's so much stigma still in our collective societies around those issues. But then you also have the challenge around just lacking basic infrastructure. Not all of our communities have even emergency shelter where you can turn to be safe. I want to share this. This is now a couple of years ago in partnership with our school boards in the city of Dryden. Youth were surveyed in terms of what was the most important piece to them. We had a number of questions, and we really want to know in terms of what was important to our youth, what could we do as community agencies to make life better for them. And the number one response that came back from the youth, this is over 300 youth, was that they would like to see a safe place in the community where they weren't offered substance.
Polly, can you add to that?
I would agree with all of everything that Henry said. It's very much the same here in the Southwest. And there are limited services and limited opportunities for help. And some of those were exacerbated by the pandemic, as were people's ability to be well. And these kinds of family breakdowns and, this lack of connection to community can sometimes lead to that. And it does happen in small towns as well as the big cities, and has a tremendous impact on homelessness particularly.
Henry, I want to go back to you here because when our producer Sandra Jonas invited you to be on this program, apparently you said to her, the emergency room is a great place to study poverty. Now that's something that a lot of people, I suspect, watching or listening to this, they would not have made that connection. What did you mean by that?
Yeah. And we also delivered the EMS land ambulance service across the district of Kenora. And by that, we just have to kind of look at our call volume and the types of calls that we're getting to really get a sense in terms of what is happening in people's homes. And what I meant by that is that, if we look at just before the pandemic started to just now, and we kind of look at in terms of which segment of our communities, which segment of our population by demographic is ending up in the back of an ambulance in an emergency medical situation. In our communities, the two demographics that are really standing out right now that are between the ages of 31 to 40, we've seen a 39% increase in call volumes related to that age group. Next, our children, 0 to 10 years old, a 36% increase in call volume for that demographic. And so you start to get a sense in terms of we have parent age individuals struggling, and we have children. And so there's starting to be some connections that we're looking to saying, what is the correlation? And really, when we look at terms of health, poverty's in there. When families are not doing well, they cannot make ends meet. It plays an impact to how well people are doing on their health, what their actions and so forth. And many times when they're in a desperate crisis, they end up in ER, especially our young people.
We've got just a few minutes left here, so if I can, let me get crisp answers from all of you as we go one more go-round here. And that is, the minimum wage has been raised in the province of Ontario. We know about the federal government's child benefit programs, which have improved people's lives to a huge extent. And yet, there is this expression, the poor are still among us. Leigh, I guess I wonder, why does poverty so persist in spite of the best efforts by so many people, both in government, in the private sector, in the voluntary sector? Why does it still persist?
I'll be the first one to lift up, the current Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing and the current provincial government, just as I would the previous administration who put the Ontario, Poverty Prevention Act in place. The fact is that you're pushing you're pushing a snowball up a hill at this moment when it comes to this issue, because it's something that had been neglected by previous generations for such a amount of time. The federal housing infrastructure had been eroded significantly during the 1990s, and anything that we're doing at this point is not just patchwork, but it's also piecemeal when you consider the fact that we're already 10 to 20 to 15 years behind the gamut. I can buy a home, as I have here in my community, for significantly less than I could from another community that I was proud to call home for so long. And I am one of those twilight of my youth folks who became an export to a different community to access the appropriate services and family supports, and also a better paying job and an opportunity.
Okay, but hang on. Leigh, a lot of people are going to say you moved 2,000 miles away in order to have the kind of life that you have right now. That's not something that a lot of people want to do.
No, and it's not something that a lot of people can do.
Right.
So the fact is I've met so many incredible people working frontline in homelessness who are just one great opportunity away from significant success, but are also so many times the folks who are on the edge of the cusp of this issue are only one paycheck from falling through the cracks as well. So, in all intents and purposes, it becomes a scenario where every effort that's being made is genuine, and no doubt all governments are attaching themselves to this issue because it's harder to ignore in a time of isolation and when we're talking about making sure that people are isolating in place and making safe decisions for everyone's collective health. It's very difficult to ignore a segment of the population that we would have generally brushed off as having to lift themselves out of poverty and pull up their bootstraps. We recognize there's a collective health impact to ignoring this issue in times
Leigh,
now.
you're going to forgive me. I'm going to jump in because I want to say
Sure.
I'm going to make sure we save enough time for the other two guys, and I want to hear them on
Sure.
this as well. Paulie, this expression, the poor will always be among us. I mean, you're in the business of trying to improve people's lives. Do you believe that expression?
I don't believe it has to be so. I think we can make a huge difference by increasing the minimum wage, increasing social assistance rates. Neither have kept up with inflation over the past many years, and policies to slow the costs of housing and rentals. There's opportunities to even the playing field a little bit.
And what's a living wage I guess, in your neck of the woods?
The information that we have in Chatham-Kent's a bit outdated. It's about the $16, $17 amount range. That's before the pandemic and so on. I would suggest it's probably around the $18 an hour wage, and that would be a very, a getting by wage.
That $18 is a getting by wage, and we're not there yet.
No.
Now, okay, Henry, how about in Northwestern Ontario? Are the poor always going to be among us?
It doesn't have to be so, and I think unless some things change, it might be so. A lot of good work is being done by all levels of government. I do think we need to be rethinking poverty reduction programs, like especially social assistance, so that we don't park people in poverty. I think the other piece is we need to double down on the creation of homes. This is infrastructure, housing, and I think the last piece is that we need to be very intentional about how we get people out of poverty, and I think having specific strategies for marginalized in terms of Indigenous people, Black youth. And so I think we need to be specific rather than be too general. I think
I got to know what that means. In my last 30 seconds, you say we got to be strategically specific. What does that mean?
Yeah. And in our region, for example, why is it that Indigenous youth are 3 times more likely to end up in the back of an ambulance? So I think from that standpoint, we need to be very specific in terms of does race play into poverty? Does it play into the overrepresentation of people in the justice system? And how do we address that rather than be too general? And I think we find that it does play a role.
Henry Wall from Kenora, Paulie Smith from Chatham-Kent, Leigh Bursey, who's in Newfoundland but helped start the Brockville Street Friends. Really glad all of you could share your experiences with us tonight here on TVO. Many thanks.
Thank you very much.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.